Hello, everybody. Welcome. So in a moment, I'm going to be chatting to a guest. It's my first kind of interview with somebody outside MongoDB. I'm very much looking forward to it. If I had a choice of first guest, this would definitely be the one. In the meantime, if you're watching the stream, could you add your name and just like where you're watching from in the chat? It's really helpful to us to have some kind of interaction as the call goes on or the live stream goes on. Yeah, it would be great to hear from you. So my name is Mark Smith, as it says on the screen. I'm a senior developer advocate at MongoDB. And I'm coming to you from Edinburgh. It is 4 o'clock and I've had to close the blinds so that everything looks okay, but it's a nice sunny day outside. We've got Swati in the chat. I can see. Where are you watching from, Swati? That would be good to know. It's always nice to see where people are joining from. Yeah, I guess I should introduce our guest. I'm a great fan of what he's done. He's the as well as being a MongoDB champion, which is a really exclusive bunch of people. There's only 24 of them, I think, worldwide. He's the author of the Beanie ODM, which is very fast become one of the most popular object document mappers in the Python ecosystem. Yeah, I guess if there's, I should bring him onto the screen so he can hear from himself. Hi, Roman. So this is Roman Wright.
Hey.
Thank you for joining me. You're joining from Brazil, is that right?
Nope, I'm joining from Costa Rica.
Oh, Costa Rica.
But it's quite close.
Well, I mean, from here, they seem very close together. But I imagine when you're actually there, they're quite far apart. Thank you for joining me. So what time is it where you are? You're, I think, 4 hours?
It's 9 a.m.
Oh, 9 a.m. That's actually earlier than I thought. Yeah. Thank you for joining us this early in the morning. You're looking very, very bright, given it's the start of your day. So yeah, I can see a few people in the chat. We've got Zhenhai, who is watching on LinkedIn, joining us from New York, which is great. I think that I love the fact that people can join from around the world. It's even more amazing, really, that we've got you joining us from Costa Rica, Roman. It's, given it's on the other side of the world from where I am right now. So I covered the two main things I know about you, Roman, that you're the author of Beanie and that you're a MongoDB champion. And I think we'll be talking about those a little bit more. Is there anything else you think the audience should know about you? Kind of what you consider your specialities to be, kind of what kind of person you are?
Sure. So I'm Roman, and I'm Python developer. I'm actually a software developer, so I use different languages, but Python was for a long time my main language. Currently, I work for Microsoft as a senior software developer. I'm author of Beanie and a few more less popular packages, open source. And I think that's it. Nothing more.
Okay. So you say that it sounds just like you're not a Python developer full-time these days. What language are you working in these days?
Currently I write in C# and some query languages like KQL, SQL, and etc.
Yeah. I tend not to think of query languages as being programming languages, but it's a very good point that you can spend quite a lot of time building those I don't know, programs, queries. So yeah, how do you find the switch from Python to C#? Is it because they're very different kind of languages, aren't they? Going from sort of dynamic to more static languages.
I thought completely the same before I started, because back in time Python and C# was completely different, but modern C# and modern Python has a lot of similar things, like async await patterns, how it works with lists, with dictionaries, and etc. So many things I think they get from each other, and it wasn't that difficult as I thought. So
nice. Yeah, I actually worked with async in C# before it was ported to Python. So the Python community definitely owes a big debt to the people who added that to C#. which is great. We'll be looking at some async code later because I have some Beanie and Fast API code to show you, and you may reel back in horror. So hopefully that won't be your reaction, but it should give us some things to kind of point at and talk about some of the kind of features of Beanie. So yeah, I said at the start of the call that I'm a big fan of yours, especially a big fan of Beanie. And it was, I think, how long has it been out? 4 years? Is that right? It's not very long, really.
Yeah, I think 3 or 4 years. I don't count actually. I count only stars on GitHub. there are many.
Yeah, I think you're over 2,000 now, if I remember rightly.
Yeah,
it's
more than 2,000. Well. It's amazing.
Yeah, I can't imagine getting that many stars on any of my projects. I think my most popular GitHub repo is a 200 or 300 stars, and it's a repository of my worst Python code. I basically maintain it as a sort of ongoing joke or maybe art project, and so they're not good stars, you know. There are people going, I can't believe how bad this code is. I have to come back to it later. So yeah, definitely not your levels of success. But I wrote a blog post about Beanie, I think the day after it was launched, because I saw.
It was awesome. I didn't expect that anybody will see it because I just published just because I decided like let's do it, and the next day or maybe in 2 days I saw like this cocktail article from you, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah,
what's going on?
Well, I saw that I wasn't the only one who picked up on how cool Beanie was, right? Is that I saw it on Twitter and it was a retweet from somebody else. So, and this is kind of what I liked about Twitter before the sort of evolution of Twitter. It's like, I followed a lot of people in the Python ecosystem, and I saw that a lot of people were getting excited about it. And I thought, well, we should have a tutorial on that. It's a MongoDB ODM. So, we can write something. And I was doing a lot of things with cocktail data at the time. This is actually, I've updated the code. So this is the code we're going to look at in a little while. So yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, that was great. And then you thanked me for the post and sent me a sticker, which I still have. I don't want to put it on a laptop because then when I replace laptops, I'll have to lose the sticker. So I need to find somewhere to actually stick that to something. But thank you very much for that. So I've been a fan of Beanie from day 2, I guess, not technically day 1. Do you want to explain what an object document mapper is, or would you rather I did? Because there'll be people on this stream who I suspect don't really know what that is.
Yeah, sure. So MongoDB itself has its own query language. And from different languages, programming languages, we need a way to map this query language results and operators to programming languages objects. And this is how we name it, Object Document Mapper. It means we map object from a programming language, in our case in Python, to documents, which is atomic entity in MongoDB. So yeah, and Beanie uses PyIdentity classes as this object structure class to map them into documents in MongoDB actually. And also it did only this at the very beginning, like only mapper, and every query had to use native MongoDB JSON queries. But now it's completely different. Now you can use all these magics from Python, like comparison operators and etc., to build your queries and use it. Like you can probably for basic stuff, you don't need to know MongoDB query language to interact with your documents using Beanie. Currently.
That's very cool. I think some of those features I may not have used yet because I hadn't noticed they'd been added, because I've been using them for kind of class definition and integrating with Fast API. But yeah, so hopefully when we're looking through my code, you can tell me where I can modernize it a bit more than what it is at the moment. So that would be good. You also, like, one of the things that I really like that you've done relatively recently with Beanie was adding the migration support. So I think it's something people often think about as an afterthought. Is like, how am I going to gradually migrate my data from one schema to another? And it's like the fact that you've got that built into your definitions in the same way as, say, Django does for a relational database. I think it's very cool.
This is true, and this is a bit tricky because when we talk about relation databases, there is a strict schema which we migrate actually, while in MongoDB there is no schema. You can set up a schema on the collection level, but in general case you don't have any, and the schema itself is written in your code actually. In our case, Beanie set it using Pydantic classes. And I decided that we need migrations, and we need two kinds of them, like not only schema migration, but the data migration, which probably even more important in case of MongoDB, because usually you not only migrate, like you not only add or remove a field, but you also split data from one field to different fields or even to different collections, and etc. I decided to make a flexible tool for this, like where you can add Python logic inside of the migration.
Yeah, it's very cool. I'd like to see more tools around that, like maybe built on top of Beanie. But I think it's an area where we could do with more library support generally. It's because it's just sort of, I don't want to call it a problem, but it's kind of a challenge of maintaining MongoDB databases. Is sometimes they're vast, terabytes of data, and one of the benefits of MongoDB is that flexible schema, that fact that you can have documents that are different versions of your schema sort of coexisting. But at some point, you're going to gradually want them to roll them up, either when you're updating the data in a single document, or you usually can't do it as a big bang kind of like, I'm going to run this script once and have everything updated. So it's really good to see that you're thinking about that. As far as I'm aware, that's a unique feature in Beanie compared to the other ODMs that are out there. To give you an idea of the overlap in our interests, we have Hack Week at MongoDB every year, where all of engineering takes a week out of the sort of the day job, forms small teams, and builds anything really that they want to build. And about 3 years ago, myself and an engineer called Shane, who works on PyMongo, took the week out to build a migration framework for MongoDB. And I don't think we even built it on Pydantic or anything like that. We should have done. I think we built our own kind of equivalent of Pydantic and the migration framework. And we had two versions. Like, one worked in code on the client, so it pulled the document, changed it, and then saved it. And then Shane did some really clever stuff that meant a lot of those migrations could also be converted to MongoDB query language and kind of run inside the database. It was a neat project, but at the end of it,
much faster.
I mean, it would be faster, but you're not limited because the query language is actually Turing complete. So in fact, you can do anything, but that's not necessarily advisable. It's sometimes it's just better to work in code than query language. We've been talking about Beanie. There's also Bunnet, which is, I guess, a lot of modern development is being done in async. So I guess if people are picking an ODM for a new project, they're probably not building it on a synchronous framework. But I know Bunnet is the synchronous version of Beanie, which is another one of your sort of main projects.
At some point, I decided that I need a synchronous version, and even there are 2 or maybe 3 minor versions of Beanie in PyPI, which has synchronous version together in the same package. But supporting this stuff was a nightmare because of all these async generators and synchronous generators, and all the syntax is super different, and I had to keep nearly the same code, but module by module, and it was it was a bit painful, and I decided to split them up into 2 different libraries. And the interesting fact is I didn't know how to name this library. I wanted something about a hat, but my English is not that good, and I asked community for help. And you know what?
I do. I remember it very well.
Yeah, you came up with this great name, Bunnet, and so I just fall in love in this name, and yeah, it's Bunnet now.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that many English people have never heard of a bunnet either, because it's an old-fashioned Scottish cap, and so it's just, well, in fact, it's kind of Scottish slang for a hat as well. So you might use bunnet to refer to just a hat in general. But yeah, I was really glad that you picked that. I was when I thought of it, I thought this would work well for a library name. So. Yeah, in terms of maintenance, like obviously you already said, like maintaining the two in a single code base was difficult. Like now that you've got it spun out into its own code base, are you maintaining the two libraries separately? Are they going to gradually kind of separate, like in terms of functionality, or are you finding some way to keep them in sync?
So currently I have a process like 2, 3, sometimes 4 times per year. I just sync Beanie into Bunnet. I don't implement every single feature in Bunnet at the same time as in Beanie. So everything is going to Beanie firstly. And actually, it's not only about the features. It's about bug fixes. It's about pull requests from community. And imagine if I have to sync every single pull request into Bunnet just at evening, I will not have any time to work on anything, and even anything else.
Okay.
So, and I decided after every major change, or if there are a lot of minor changes, I just sync it. Literally using these Git tools where I check the difference and look like here is a sync code, so I'm using await here. Here I will use this specific operator that I implemented for Bunnet, and these ways.
That's a good reason to keep your Git history clean.
Like 3-4 hours and it's synced, but every time I'm trying to delay it, like I will do it on Sunday, I will do it next Saturday maybe.
Yeah, it's not the most creative of tasks, is it? I wish there was I don't know, just a better way to do it. I'm not sure what that would look like, but I've been thinking about it more and more. I've been playing with the Sans.io kind of approach to building client libraries recently, and I've been vaguely wondering like where else you could apply that kind of architecture, where you build the core of your library as essentially iterators in many cases, or you just work out what your inputs and outputs are, and then you have a sort of an outer shell that does the either synchronous or asynchronous driving of that underlying protocol. But I don't know what that would look like in an ODM. So I'm not recommending that as a technique necessarily. It would come with its own problems. Right, yeah. So sorry, carry on.
The most difficult is about this. Beanie uses a lot of magic from Python, like it overrides a lot of operators and etc. Even overrides the actual await operator for some classes. So, and that's why it's not actually portable well. So
yeah, of course, I hadn't even thought about that. That was when I did maybe some of the viewers will know, I did a series of live streams earlier this year where we built an ODM from scratch. And it was meant as an educational project. It wasn't meant to compete with anybody else's ODMs, but I mean, partly it's a fun project, right? It really dives into the depths of how Python works. But about halfway through, I decided I'd been building a synchronous library, and I decided I wanted an asynchronous library. And so I had to do that porting, and it was amazing the areas that caused me problems, like, in terms of working out the sort of new asynchronous way to, I don't know, the equivalent for some of that low level stuff. And I gave a talk about building your own async at PyGotham a few years ago. So it's not like I don't know how async works. I really do. But it's tough, right? When you get into those low-level details.
But I really love it actually, because all this await stuff is adding a new kind of construction. Like when you build a query using Beanie or any other ODM or similar libraries, usually you have this thing like chaining. You chain the methods like filter, sort, group, etc. And using await syntax, you just mark that the last guy would actually run the query. While with Synchronous, you have to put something else into the end, because it cannot understand that it's the time to to start the query. It can build it, but when you actually shoot it, you have additional syntax.
Yeah, it's I mean, one of the things I really like about async await is just every time you see an async method, you know that it's doing some IO. Essentially that's when it's interacting with outside services. And that becomes really powerful. Like, one of the common mistakes that people have with PyMongo is they think that when they create a client, it connects to the database. But it doesn't, because it's really lazy. It does nothing when you create a client, and it does nothing when you call get database or get collection, because it just doesn't need to, because it can create those on the fly when it needs to actually do something. So it's only when you call command or find or aggregate that it actually even makes a network connection. And so people get errors with their database credentials, but they get it way further down their program than they think they're going to. So when you look at Motor, which is asynchronous driver, you can see when it connects to the database, because that's your first call that you have to await. And so everything like that is very explicit, which I guess you could call it an internal detail. Maybe people shouldn't care about that, but I think that they do. It's like, they should care that when their program actually does something. But we're 20 minutes in, which is like because I enjoy talking to you. So I thought I might bring up some code, just so we can talk the audience through kind of what a Beanie program looks like. So I have to remember how to get this on the screen. Let's maybe try it like that. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it, because there's some people who watch this on mobile phones, and so they're very small screens, and so I try to make things big enough. If anybody can't read what's on the screen, like, let me know in the chat, and I will make the text a little bit bigger. I might make it bigger anyway. So yeah, I built this fast API application. I built it for a blog post. If you were to have a quick look on the MongoDB website. In fact, I think if you look in the description on YouTube and LinkedIn, you'll see a link to the blog post I wrote like several years ago. And the date's actually wrong. The date says it's 2 years old, but it isn't 2 years old. It is more like 4. And yeah, I built, and it also says it's a Flask application, which it isn't. It's a fast API application, which is actually kind of important. So this is the entry point. It may be a bit of a mess because I've been working on this today and I don't think I've documented everything that I've done. So yeah, this is the sort of important line for a fast API application, just like creating the application. But I'm also passing it this lifespan, and this is the thing that creates my MongoDB connection and initializes Beanie, and then it also shuts it down at the end of the application. So one of the things I had to update today was that Fast API used to have these triggers for sort of startup and shutdown, and it doesn't anymore. They're deprecated. So this is the new way to do it. So yeah, this is my lifespan function, which just gets called with the app. And there I'm creating my client. This is already one of the things I really like about Beanie, and this next line is that init Beanie can just take a PyMongo, well, not PyMongo, but a Motor database object. Which is really cool because that then allows me to configure my client using all of the power of Motor, like all of these timeouts to just make sure my application starts up in the time that I want it to and that kind of thing before failing. So yeah, that was cool. Excuse me, I'm getting highlights come up and obscure the code. So yeah, I got my that's initializing with the database that I want to connect to, and then I just give it my list of Beanie classes, which are defined in a different file. So I've got my model all defined in here, and this is where we start to get into the Beanie schema stuff. So these are all built on Pydantic. So normally in Pydantic, you'd extend base model. In Beanie, your top level document. So this represents a document in MongoDB. So I extend document, and I already know this is wrong, right? Because that needs to be updated. Back when I wrote this, that would have changed the name of the collection, and that's not the way it's done anymore. So what's the name of the class? Is this still in a class? Is it just called meta now?
It's settings now.
Settings. I probably shouldn't have done that because that's now going to change the way my application works.
And it's not more a collection name, it's just name.
Okay.
Because
there we go. I am now going to comment
there is
that out.
no more names there, so
yeah, I'm going to comment that out simply because I already have a database initialized and I want it to actually work with that database. So we can have a look at that in a moment. And then the name is a string. So this is again, like if anybody used Pydantic or Attrs or even data classes to kind of define class schemas, like this will be very familiar. My ingredients is a list of ingredient objects. And those extend base model because these are sub documents. So this is embedded data inside my documents. And then my ingredient has a name of the ingredient. So that would be something like whiskey. And then the quantity is optional. I'm not quite sure why I made that optional. It was a long time ago. And I was in a hurry, right? I wanted to be the first blog post about Beanie. And then I've got some optional strings in the ingredients, like the quantity, which would be 2, and then units might be teaspoons or something. And I'll cover the aggregation in a minute. So this is a very simple model, right? It's like one top level document or collection, and then a couple of embedded sort of arrays. And then what that looks like in Compass, and I created this in code. So this isn't sort of like raw data. I created this using the Beanie classes. So these are my cocktails. And because I didn't change that meta class, they're all cool. That's all saved in a collection that's named after the class, which totally makes sense. And then I've got my cocktail, French 75. It's got 3 ingredients. Each one of those ingredients is it follows that ingredient schema. Then quantity follows the quantity schema. This is all really bad data. So I wrote a random cocktail generator script in like 15 minutes with some help of an LLM. So I've even got duplicate cocktail names, which is a really bad idea. But I was in a bit of a rush to create sort of a reasonable quantity of sample data. So yeah. And then, so that's, I can create the classes and I can call save. I'll jump to the script actually that I used. So initdb, there's all my cocktail names, came from the LLM. And then I'm loading a single cocktail and then just kind of mutating it, setting the name and then mutating the ingredients a little bit. It's really messy. If anybody's interested, there's an open issue on the repository that I created an hour ago for improving the initializing sort of data script. But yeah, once I've created my cocktail, which is loaded from JSON using Pydantic's model validate JSON function, so that gives me a cocktail instance, and then I can just call save on it. So that's like a dynamic method that you've added in Beanie to Pydantic to allow me to save a document into a collection, which is very cool. So it was just a really quick script here. It was easier to write it in code than it was to kind of write something that generated JSON and then just sort of used Mongo import to import the data, which I thought was a really good sort of validation of the library. So what that gives me, once I got my fast data, and feel free to tell me if anything's wrong or out of date, Roman, because I'm just skimming through the code at the moment.
No, everything looks correct. I like it.
Wow.
I wanted to tell about the save method a bit more, because this is one of my favorite methods there, because it can insert and it can update documents inside of the database. And
Yep.
what is a good thing, when it updates the document, it needs to get the updated data back to the document to update the actual fields of pedantic object. And it should be, as soon we use async await patterns, it should be atomic operation. But MongoDB has these methods where you can say like what should be returned after the update method, and you can return what it was before in the document and what was after the update in the document, and it uses this the second option with after, and it was great because for a few even major methods, major versions of Beanie, we have the save without supporting of atomic operations for save. And it was messy sometimes because of race conditions, because some people uses this for really high load projects where they update so many objects in parallel, and without atomic operations the data can get messy. But all the change in methods currently, including save, are atomic and safe to use in high load projects. So
That's very cool. Yeah, that's genuinely very cool. We have I can't remember exactly what the article is about, but there's an article on the MongoDB website talking about choosing an ODM. And one of the things it says is if you're going to use an ODM, make sure that it supports kind of find one and update style atomic operations, because otherwise you can end up overwriting data. If you're just considering your document to be the truth and then sort of blitting it into the database, you're going to overwrite data that other people have sort of updated in the document. So yeah, this is that's really good to hear. Yeah, I think it's the interesting thing about ODMs is people underestimate how much complexity goes into making them work intuitively and not sort of mess up your data. It's like an ODM seems simpler than, say, a relational equivalent like an ORM, because there's not so many entities in play. Maybe you're working with sort of documents, but the API for MongoDB is very powerful because the data structure is very powerful, right? So yeah, if you're going to build something that simplifies that, then you can't sort of obscure the power of the underlying API, because that's important,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. Let's have a look at the roots. So this is really my fast API application, and we're about to get into one of the things I really like about Beanie as well. But we'll start off with certainly relatively straightforward stuff. So I've got this endpoint called getCocktail, and it just gets a cocktail by ID using the get function. So again, Beanie get function, and then if none comes back, it raises an HTTP exception. So we can actually play with that, except I need a browser. There we go. So this is the docs, the fast API. If you haven't used fast API before, this gets generated for you automatically, a kind of browser for your API. This is the endpoint for that. You can put in a cocktail ID, and if I try it out and execute it, it comes back with hopefully, oh no, cocktail not found. It's the wrong ID, right? It's that sample data isn't in the database, but I can list all cocktails using the second endpoint, and that will give me an ID for the first cocktail. And this should come back with a French 75 if I just insert that in there. There we go. Cocktail with 2 ingredients. That's cherry liqueur and lemonade. That would be absolutely appalling. I don't recommend making that cocktail. It's certainly not a French 75. But yeah, so that works quite nicely. It's very simple to write. I didn't have to do any kind of translation of underscore ID. So like one of the things that you immediately get when you move from using PyMongo to generate JSON APIs to using Beanie to generate JSON APIs is that you're doing that sort of conversion automatically between object IDs and strings, and it makes IDs certainly a lot easier to deal with, I have to say. And yeah, it's even looking up by a string, which is kind of cool. Oh, it's not a string. Sorry, it is an object ID, but the conversion's done automatically. So it's provided in the request as a string. So then why have I got to get cocktail by ID there? Oh, that was the wrong one. So this, oh, that's the router, get cocktail by ID. I've messed up. This is a sort of data API layer, and this is actually our router. So that was actually the function, and it just calls get cocktail and passes the cocktail ID. You know, I can't even remember how this works. It's amazing. But it does also say that response model is a cocktail, and you get that in the documentation. So this is one of the benefits of Beanie extending Pydantic. So here, if we look at get cocktail by ID, it says in the auto-generated documentation that it's going to come back with cocktail. In fact, where does it say that? So I think it says it near the top. Cancel.
It's probably somewhere in the bottom. No?
I don't know. Successful response. It gives you an example value, but it doesn't specifically say that it's a cocktail that it's returning. I would have expected it to, because right down the bottom of this page, it does describe the different schema. And that's automatic, but I was expecting it to refer to that somewhere here. I maybe just can't see it. This always happens on live streams, trying to read on screen and just sort of failing to notice something obvious. But that's this automatic documentation. This is done automatically, which is really quite cool. Sort of sample data and that kind of thing. You can also, in Fast API specifically, you can annotate routes to say with sample data, so you can give it something more useful than just the word string in a string, which is nice. So let's go one level up in complexity. So they got list cocktails. This is just going to return a list of cocktail instances, which then gets converted to JSON. It's not very interesting. This is where now I don't think I've got an example of find in here, but I really like the aggregate method that you've added to Beanie. So this is one of the things that I would say is essential in an ODM, is this ability to run aggregations and then tell it what the schema is of the resulting objects. So if people there's a surprising number of MongoDB developers who aren't familiar with aggregation. It's one of our 2 query languages on top of the sort of find query language, and it's so powerful. And as well as actually just being a more powerful way to find data, if you have complex requirements, you can also reshape the data, and that means that even though I'm calling aggregate on a cocktail collection as the sort of key collection, I'm not going to necessarily get cocktail objects back. And so that's where in this case, I've got an aggregation that splits out all the ingredients in every cocktail, works out how many cocktails each ingredient is in, and then it sorts them, and then it returns essentially these sort of ingredient summaries with just a name of an ingredient and a total, like the number of cocktails that it's in. And then if you lose that schema, that's a shame, right? Because it's like then you're not interacting with Fast API properly, because you're not defining your schemas, or you have to do something else to make it work. Whereas in this case, you've just allowed me to build this ingredient aggregation Pydantic class that just says I'm going to have an ID and a total. That's all I'm going to have in here. And so I can validate that, and it auto documents it. So now going to make this a bit bigger because I feel like that's too small. So if I look at the ingredients endpoint, I should have closed these before. It does that relatively complex query, and it says like my example is going to be a list of these ID totals. Again, if I'd annotated this class better, I would have got better documentation here. But just the fact that it's picking up my schema, and the documentation for the function there. So now if I try it out, that's exactly what I get. And because I got bad documented data, I've got 59 cocktails with blackberries in, 65 with lemonade. But yeah, that's the original data set had some quite nice numbers in there. And I just, yeah, that's like, I use aggregations a lot because I often don't want to just get a document or a list of filtered documents from the database. Like if you do, the find endpoint is great. But often what I'm trying to do is get insights into my data, essentially do a form of analytics of some kind. And so losing the ability of the ODM when I did that would be a real shame, where I really like the fact that you added that into Beanie.
And you use native JSON aggregation queries, and Beanie supports only them for aggregations because aggregation framework is super flexible. But there is a library that can convert Python methods and Python objects into aggregation query for MongoDB, which could be used together with Beanie.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't have the link nearby, but I can share it, and we can put it somewhere in the description of this video
Please
later.
do. That would be amazing. My colleague, ex-colleague Joe, once wrote a library to do that, and then I think got stuck. And so there's this sort of it's a hard problem.
It's hard to cover all of them because the syntax is super flexible, and there are so many corner cases there. I think this library doesn't cover 100%, like it may be 70, 80, or 90% of all the syntax, but still you can do most of the stuff using Python syntax instead of JSON, which is nice when you want to rename something in your code, using idea instead of just searching and renaming in the text files.
Yeah.
Because ideas supports Python, but not JSONs inside of the Python.
So I've my colleague John, who's a very experienced MongoDB user, now uses functions to generate pretty much every part of this. So instead of writing, he would never write this. He would write wind. And then somewhere in a utility library, he would essentially have def unwind, path, yeah. And it's important to put quotes around when you're writing Python, path. And so what you've got there is basically the same thing. It doesn't do any validation or anything, but it does allow you to sort of build up these functions. You can have sensible defaults. So maybe I don't need to pass ingredients in, it's like you get the power of Python syntax. And then because sometimes this data structure is a good example. That's a kind of complex data structure. Whereas if I called that group and sum by name, then that sort of says what it does, which is sort of the essence of functional programming, isn't it? It's so even if you don't pass it a parameter, it can still give you sort of more readability in your pipeline. But I think having a library to provide more of this at a high level, and maybe even some validation and some type hinting and things like that would be absolutely amazing. I've had a dream for quite a long time that you could validate these pipelines. So if you had a stage that only output documents with the field ingredient, then the next stage, if it depended on ingredient, you could kind of say, well, the input stage doesn't allow that. It doesn't pass through that field. So this is now an invalid pipeline. But there are certain stages where you just don't know what's going to come out of it because it's dependent on the data. And so then you lose that ability to validate. But if you could validate just when you can, like that's still better than nothing, isn't it? It's sort of a bit like type hinting in Python, where if you have the type hints, it's sort of somewhere in the code, like you can do a certain amount of validation that code's correct. And if they're not there, they're not there. It's fine.
And another one good thing is sometimes you need to build your aggregation pipelines using some conditions. Like you not always know which pipeline you will use, and having conditions and using Python syntax for the builder is a bit better than just trying to update huge 10 steps JSONs like you had to.
That's very true. It's yeah, it's yeah. I think in most of these cases, like as I said, like even if you didn't have a library for that, like building an abstraction for that is a really powerful thing to do. Even if it's application specific, it's a really good thing to do. It's just to, but it's very easy with MongoDB where you've, especially if you're working with raw motor, like or PyMongo, like it's BSON in and BSON out, and they're both these data structures that you can interact with directly. But if you're just starting with simple queries, that might be fine, or simple documents. But as things start to get bigger, you're then left with this code base that's working directly with BSON data, and that can get a bit horrible quite quickly. Sort of like you're going down sub documents of 3 levels to pull out something, or it's not in the right format. So then you have to check whether it might not exist. So then you have to check whether it exists or not. And just being able to abstract that away and have something like just make sensible decisions for you makes your code a lot easier to reason with at the higher level.
I have this similar thing inside of the Beanie because Beanie has some other magic inside, and some of this magic, like for example, it supports links or references. It uses aggregations for sure to look up objects from different collections and to merge them into the same result. But lookup operator has different syntax for MongoDB 4.4, MongoDB 5.0, and etc. And depending on the data, even on the database version, I have to provide different aggregation pipelines there, and so I had a lot of abstractions over there.
Wow!
So yeah,
well done. Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me that if you're having to abstract joins, then you have to worry about that. It's not the user providing the lookups. So yeah, that's a good job there. I'm sorry we caused you that pain. But, yeah, it's yeah. So I noticed on the Beanie website that you've got a team now maintaining the project. So it's not just you anymore. So well done. For the first thing to say is like congratulations.
Yeah, I wanted to say a huge thank you for people who supports everything now, who merge PRs for me, who check PRs, because currently, as the project is getting not only bigger itself but more popular, there are much more feature requests, much more bug reports, and etc. And even if Beanie didn't change, but Python code style libraries are changing continuously, for example, and we face new and new bugs about the typing and etc. Just getting out of nowhere, and yeah, there are around 10 people who checking the PRs currently, and there are 2 people with write permissions who can merge everything into the main branch. And I super appreciate this effort because I know that supporting open source project is not that simple, and it's time consuming.
Yeah, definitely. I have never had a successful open source project, and in a weird way, I'm vaguely grateful for that. I have various friends who maintain open source projects, and it's as you say, it's a lot of work. And I have a family, so it's like I have to spend time with them sometimes.
It's
yeah.
always trade-off. Should you play with the sun or play with the Beanie during the night?
So I am of the a terrible mindset where I would consider the Beanie to be the more fun option.
Basically, I even took a few vacations just to support new major features for Beanie. For example, last year when Pydantic 2.0 was released, I had to take a vacation for a few weeks to support the second version of Pydantic in Beanie because it was a huge change there, and I had to not only support the second version but still support the first one because a lot of people didn't migrate just in a second to the second version, and and yeah, I was finding it. I think it's a bit crazy to have a vacation just for this.
Well, thank you very much for your dedication. But yeah, I think it's really important to tell these stories to people because often people don't know quite how much of a burden it is, like maintaining a successful open source project. And yeah, it can open some doors and it's got some rewards to it. But at the same time, I guess I'm sure you're the same as every other maintainer that I know. And occasionally you get a pull request, or not even a pull request, like an issue telling you to fix a bug, or maybe they won't use your library, or they're demanding essentially your time. Which you get to choose whether to donate your time to these things, and people don't appreciate that. So
hopefully community of Beanie is really full of kind people, and most of the issues and pull requests are starting with thank you very much for your work and etc. So and it's energizing, actually. I like it. Sometimes I have messages in my personal social networks like, hey, fix this.
Are these people or like I've got friends who would definitely talk to me that way, but they know me pretty well. I wouldn't accept that from anyone.
Just some strangers, and it's it's interesting.
It's a shame. I think the MongoDB community is amazing. I think that I've met so many warm, helpful, friendly people, including yourself, in this community, and so hopefully we don't have a disproportionate number of those people. There's always somebody, isn't there, that doesn't understand how these things work. So yeah, we're kind of running out of time. So I just want to we've gone through some code, hopefully given people some inspiration about how Beanie works, what it can do for you. Especially in comparison, I've been using it a lot with Fast API, as you can see, and the two work so well together that it's like I can't imagine one without the other. That's not true. I recently built something with Motor directly, and then I found that every class that I had to have essentially a mapping into BSON and out of BSON, like all the stuff that Beanie just does for you automatically. And I realized that it was the wrong way to do things. But by that time, a lot of the code was written. It had seemed simpler at the start, and then I realized it wasn't. So I'm actually in the process of rewriting that using Beanie at the moment. So partly so that I can write a tutorial about it and explain what the benefits are. So hopefully we'll see that in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, you're a MongoDB champion. And I think that was 3 months ago, something like that you were. I don't really know what the process is.
This was the renewal, so this is the second year of my championship.
Oh, okay. I may have missed that. For some reason, I thought that you weren't before. I remember having this conversation.
I think MongoDB gave me too many badges. Like I was a MongoDB user group leader back in Berlin when I was living in Germany. Then I became this champion guy, and again, champion guy second year. So thank you very much for.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for your work, like helping MongoDB users. So yeah, I think the two things are like MongoDB user group leader is like a separate thing from the champions, but it's like it definitely helps to be a user group leader if you're looking to be sort of elected to champion status. But yeah, you were as soon as your name came up, I was very pleased. So yeah, and that's what is it particularly that drew you to MongoDB originally? Like, what is it about MongoDB that you really like?
I think that everything started with Beanie, actually. Like a year before I started to make these meetups in Berlin. I was living in Berlin before. And maybe during COVID, maybe a bit before this time. I wanted to play with Fast API, and I found that there is literally no ODM which supports Pydantic, which supports Fast API style, etc. And I decided, like, probably I can do it myself. And it was quite simple one, just a mapper to the classes. Pydantic can serialize and deserialize everything back and forth to SON or JSON. And after that, when I published, it got popular, like in a few months. Not as popular as currently, but many people recognized it and texted me like, "Hey, please do this feature and these features there." And I was like, "Whoa, it could be really nice to have these features there." And then I don't remember who, Steny or somebody from MongoDB connected with me, like, "Hey, maybe you want to do some meetups about MongoDB. You probably can talk about Beanie there and just connect with other MongoDB guys." And I decided, like, yeah, this sounds really great. And this is how I became MongoDB user group leader Berlin. I hosted, like, I don't remember, around 7 probably meetups there in Berlin. And then this champion program started, and I was invited also, and I'm super appreciate this. And yeah, during these meetups, I found that it's interesting to make other types of content, not only talks, but articles, probably videos, and etc. And I started to write articles actually about how to use Beanie and how to use MongoDB in general, because Beanie was getting more and bigger, and I had to explain, like, what I mean by this API and etc. Like what is the way I suppose it should be used and etc. And so yeah, I wrote some articles, and somehow natively I became this part of MongoDB community, and I'm super happy to be.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of key beats in that story. It's like you start something that's a little bit outside your comfort zone, and then you just get it becomes this sort of amazing opportunity to learn lots of new things, like how to communicate in different ways, how to be part of a community, how to nurture a community. It's it's funny how these things all start with usually like, that can't be too hard. And then you start going and you realize, like, actually there's a lot more there than you think it is. But Rowan, it's been fantastic talking to you. I think we've more or less run out of time. I don't have a neat way to finish the call. I should have kind of thought of, like, a neat question that I could get you to answer and then say thank you very much and then end the call. But I haven't done that. So instead, I'm just going to say thank you so much for all your work, the work that you've done for the MongoDB and Python communities. And as you know, like, if there's anything we can do to help you out at any point, like, just let us know. And it's been great talking to you for the last hour.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm super glad to be here, and happy to chat with you, actually. So thank you very much.
Likewise, been a joy. See you, everybody.
See you.